I'm going to talk about Syria and about Israel's view of Syria. Israel's view of Syria and what's happening there is different than that of the United States and that of the Russians. So it's worthwhile to look at what's happening in Syria and then what the three, what I consider primary players, are doing. Syria has become a battleground for Sunni extremists versus Shiite expansionist extremists. You have Alawites and Hezbollah and Iran on one side, and the Brotherhood and the Nusra Front and al-Qaeda on the other side. Looking down the pike, there is going to be one hell of a battle between the Hezbollah forces that have now crossed into Syria to fight on behalf of Bashar Assad and the Nusra Front guys. I mean, there are not people in the world who detest one another more than the two of them do, so that's going to be an interesting battle. There are secular moderates in Syria. There aren't very many, however, and they are not the people who fight. It has become clear that the Free Syrian Army, which is where we had invested a lot of our hopes and our intentions, the backbone of the fighting for them was done by Islamist forces, and now they are in a position of trying to get rid of those forces. So I think the idea of the United States arming and training people to fight in Syria is close to dead, and probably should be. First of all, there are very few people who would meet our criteria as friends of the United States, people that we'd want to arm and train. Secondly, the idea that you need to teach any of these people to kill is absurd. They know how to kill. In fact, they probably know that better than they know anything else. And the idea that by giving them our weapons, and better training, we would have them kill the people that we want dead is also absurd. The United States has a long history of teaching people to kill with our weapons on the assumption that they will kill who we want them to kill. We created the Palestinian Security Forces for the Palestinian Authority. We told it to dismantle the Palestinian terrorist infrastructure so that the Israelis could have relief from terrorism. So we said to the Palestinians, kill your brothers and your cousins on behalf of your enemies. It was never a reasonable proposition. We've spent 10 years, no, not 10 years, 8 years training the Iraqi army. Above board, lots of money, the best trainers that we have with the best intentions that we have. And we have not fielded for the Iraqis a serious, capable fighting force, and unfortunately it appears that it may devolve back into a sectarian fighting force now that we're not there. Afghanistan, the same thing. We train them, we arm them, we expect them to kill the Taliban. That means we expect them to kill their cousins. On behalf of what? The U.S. who's leaving. So we're not very good at it. We don't pick well. You know, we trained the Malian army, and we asked it to fight al-Qaeda. Instead, the Malian army overthrew the Malian government, and when it finally went out to kill al-Qaeda, it wasn't able to do that either. Egypt may be the only place in which we actually will get something back for 30 years' worth of military investment. In these wars we have, the United States has no natural ally. So our choice is always between like cancer and a heart attack, right? Maybe we should have chosen one or the other, and we may still choose one or the other. I think President Obama was hoping that Assad would simply respond to his very civilized call that Assad drop dead. But he didn't. He didn't. The administration's policy on Syria has been a series of visceral reactions to graphic violence. That's what they do. They see something ugly and they try to respond to it. It's underlined by the realization that we have no good allies anywhere. And it's offset by a gigantic distaste for confrontation of any kind in any way. We do, however, have red lines. They are not red lines on chemical weapons. They are not red lines on the death of small children. We have two red lines. One is not to enter another war on behalf of a Muslim people anywhere in the Muslim world. And the second is not to upset the Russians. That is not a policy that you can follow from one to one to one to one and get someplace. Now, on the other hand, the Russians have policy. The Russians have allies. The Russians have chosen the Shiite side of this war. They have chosen to align themselves with the Shiite expansionists versus the Sunni expansionists. It has to do with their fundamental understanding of their own interests. And this is the sort of other half of the interests that we were talking about earlier, the missile defense and all that. This is a different set of interests that the Russians have. They would rather have a nuclear Iran than have Sunni fundamentalists with shoulder-fired weapons in Chechnya. The Russians have understood that the Chechen war is an Islamist war now. It's a Sunni Islamist war. And they will do anything to keep that from coming home to them. The Russians had sponsored Nasser and Hafiz Assad and Saddam Hussein in an effort to keep Sunni fundamentalists underground, kill the Muslim Brotherhood, imprison the Muslim Brotherhood, and those guys responded. But now those guys are gone, so the Russians are doing it themselves. The Israeli view, actually, is closer to the Russian view in the sense that it's not about allies and friends. It's about history and interests. The Israelis look at the region personally, politically, militarily, and historically. Everything that the Israelis see in the region is part of the overall war against Israel that started with the birth of Israel, actually started before the birth of Israel. And the war has three streams in it. The first stream is Arab states that do not recognize the legitimacy of Israel in any form. That'd be Syria, Lebanon, Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states, Iran, the Palestinian Authority, and Hamas, and some others, but those are the ones that count right now. The second stream is countries that don't control all of their territory. And that would be, for example, Egypt and the Sinai, where things happen that the government may not want to happen, but it happens anyway. Syria's control of Lebanon as opposed to the Lebanese government's control of Lebanon. Sudan, which is an open field for Iranian weapons to move to the Sinai and then hopefully to the Gaza Strip. Iraq permits Iranian weapons to go to Syria. It also has al-Qaeda sitting in western Iraq, and there's al-Qaeda sitting in eastern Syria, and they're making common cause. So that's the second stream. The third stream is states that sponsor terrorism, and that would be Iran. It would be Saudi Arabia, which is like schizophrenic because Saudi Arabia will help us on the subject of al-Qaeda because they don't like al-Qaeda, but then sponsors Wahhabi, other Sunni fundamentalist, expansionist terrorism. But for Israel, it's all the same. Qatar has become a sponsor of terrorism. Syria sponsors Hezbollah. Turkey is now, allowing people to arm and train in their territory. So those are the three streams of the war against Israel. And Israel looks at all three of those streams and says to itself, it's not who fights, it's what they fight with. The Israeli concern is not going to be who fights. They know there's no ally in this war. And I say that advisedly. There are people who think that Israel should have supported Bashar Assad because, after all, Assad kept the Golan Heights quiet for 40 years, and it was the quietest border Israel had, and there was no terrorism across the Golan border. That does not make one an ally, because all the time that they were doing that, they were permitting the Iranian takeover of Lebanon. It might have been better, from an Israeli, strictly military point of view, it might have been better to knock off the Assad family years ago, rather than having the Assad family aligned with Iran that was building up Hezbollah in Lebanon. So Israel looks at this and says, I have no allies. The question is, who has what weapons, and what do I have to do about it? So in '67, they preempted the Egyptian Air Force. In '73, Israel saw the threat coming and decided not to preempt it, producing the Yom Kippur War with terrible casualties for Israel. They won't make that mistake again. Osirak reactor in Iraq in 1981, the Syrian nuclear facility in 2007, the strikes in Sudan in 2011, those were Iranian weapons that were going across Sudan to the Sinai, to the Gaza Strip. The Iranian Fajr 5 rockets that were in the Gaza Strip were the cause of last November's Operation Pillar of Fire. The Israelis wanted to get rid of the Fajr 5s. January of this year, the attack in Syria was about SA-17s. The attack in May was on Fatah 100 missiles. So the Israelis look at these as a discrete series of preventive measures without having a stake in the war. The Free Syrian Army may have some people in it that don't mind Israel, I don't know. But it has never been the case. We have not seen any case in which the overthrow of the existing government produced a government that was then friendly to Israel. You do have some governments that have made different strategic choices. You have Egypt, where Sadat made a strategic choice. You have Jordan, where King Hussein made a strategic choice. But the overthrow of one government for another does not lead to friends for Israel. The fact that Bibi took with him to Russia General Aviv Kochavi, who is his chief of military intelligence, is an indicator that Israel and Russia understand each other better than perhaps Russia and the United States, or the United States and Israel. They're both looking at historical trends in the region. They're both acting out of a series of well-defined national priorities. Taking your director of military intelligence, Putin brought his as well, by the way, is an indication that Netanyahu is playing with a totally open hand to the Russians. And the Russians are playing with an open hand to Israel. It's pretty clear that those S-300s are already there. Okay, the Russians hedged, but at the end of the day, they've come out and said they were existing contracts and they won't sign any new contracts, but it's pretty clear that the S-300s are there. It may be the case that the Syrians don't know what to do with them yet. The Israelis have said they'll destroy them before they're operational. I think the Russians believe that. So what you have is Israel and Russia, oddly enough, understanding how to talk to each other. They're not on the same page. They're not in the same place. But they know how to talk to each other. The United States and Russia, no. The United States and Israel on the subject of Syria, no, not really. The downside of the Israeli position, I will tell you, is that it's very, you live by defense, and defense produces more kinds of offense. It was the second intifada when Palestinians were coming into Israel and blowing up buses and doing those sorts of things. Israel built the security fence and kept them out. The natural result of that was rockets going over the tops of places that you can't get to any other way. The natural result of that is Iron Dome. The natural result of that is more and bigger and more powerful rockets. So you're always playing, in defense, you're always playing catch-up. And having clear red lines does not help you, because deterrence is not supposed to be, how do I say this? You hope that deterrence will keep people from doing things. I mean, you really do. But deterrence is not foolproof. Deterrence is not understood to be foolproof. So after someone says, I have a red line, I expect you to be deterred, I expect you not to do that, the other half of that sentence always has to be, and if deterrence fails, I'll kill you. Okay? The United States said, the president said, I have a red line on chemical weapons, but there was nothing beyond that that indicated that if the red line was crossed, something would happen on the other side of that red line. The Israelis have a series of red lines. People do cross them. People will always cross them. And they have to understand, and I think they do, that the response to that will be swift and sure and people will get killed. So that's the sort of 10,000-foot view. You have people operating, the three main players outside of the Syrians are the United States, Russia, and Israel. Each one operates from its own set of principles. Ours are extremely muddied. The Russians are not muddied, but they're not friendly to our interests. And the Israelis, as the Israelis always do, break everything down into weaponry and who has it. And that's where we are.
Shoshana, thank you very much. Could I ask you to just dwell on something that you alluded to, that we might get something back from the Egyptian military? What is the evidence of that, and is that a justification for continuing to arm them?
Yeah, I'm not sure about the justification to continue to arm them. We've already gotten something back. The Israelis and the Egyptians have been talking about Sinai security. The Egyptians were never very good at it. Okay, in the best of times, under the best moments of the peace treaty between Israel and Egypt, there were always things that crossed the Sinai that should not have. That has gotten worse because there are now more weapons and there are more people in there. But the Egyptians, military at least, seems to be trying to keep a handle on it. There has been an Israeli team in Cairo. There has been an Egyptian team in Tel Aviv. And the conversation is about how to deal with the Sinai. So I think that's good. I think that's a positive step. Is that enough to make me want to give them $1.25 billion a year? I'm not sure. But I think the other thing that we're waiting for is to see that if Egypt really goes south, if they really are hungry, which I believe they will be in the next 6 to 8 months, Egypt imports 60%, 40% of its food, 60% of its grain, has to pay in cash, doesn't have any. They've already stopped bringing in fuel that they need. They've stopped bringing in wheat that they need. So there will probably be hunger. Hunger leads to riots. Riots leads to something. I don't know what yet. The question will be, will the military take over before then? That's what we're betting on.
Okay. Let me get to somebody who hasn't asked a question, then we'll come back to you who have. Kyle?
I wanted to ask, you made the statement that you thought U.S. arming Syrian rebels was probably dead in the water. The Hill paper said, I think it was yesterday or the day before, that Senate Foreign Relations Committee is set to take up the Syrian Transition Act, I think it's called. I can look up the exact, but it says specifically, you know, arm and train Syrian rebels. You think that's not going to go anywhere?
Well, I think you're going to have real trouble figuring out who and where they are and what to do with them. And it's way behind the curve. Remember that when we say Syrian rebels, we're really talking about groups of people, some of whom have been arming and training for a dozen years, some of them longer than that. Some of them have experience fighting in Afghanistan. Some of them have experience fighting in Bosnia or Libya or whatever. So you're really talking about a wide variety of militias. The ones that really do not seem to have any military training to speak of are our friends, the Free Syrian Army, right? So you're talking about bringing these people up to snuff, because first they have to defeat Assad, and then they have to defeat the Nusra Front and Al-Qaeda and all these other guys in the Brotherhood. I don't see where we can create an army of good guys that can do that. I don't see it. They are way behind the training curve. And like I said about other people that we've trained, we've spent years trying to create armies out of people who aren't, they're not armies, but they want to kill people. You're talking here about serious armies that have been fighting and training for a long time. So, you know, intellectually, we may decide to do it. Actually, Do I think we can find enough people that we agree we should train them and then arm them and then equip them and send them out into the battlefield? The war's going to be over by then.
Shoshana, was the Free Syrian Army not one of the groups that denounced our designation of al-Nusra Front as a terrorist organization and said they're part of us and we're part of them?
Well, it's complicated. They did at one time. They also said at one time that the Brotherhood was part of them. I think what we've been doing is leaning on the people in the Free Syrian Army that we can talk to and demanding that they dissociate themselves from those people. That's the beginning of the biggest mistake, because you cannot get people to dissociate from people that are somehow like them, you know, that are Syrians, that are Muslims, that are anti-Assad. Why would they denounce those people in order to be a friend of the United States? Ask the Iraqis and the Afghans how that goes. Ask the Vietnamese how that goes. You know, there's no real incentive for them to do that, so they've been very resistant to burning their bridges with those people. And we, by the way, think they're supposed to go fight those people afterwards.
Right.
After they get rid of Assad, we want them to be the last army standing.
Right.
I don't think so.
Joel?
The Wall Street Journal reported this morning that the Russians have sent very sophisticated anti-ship missiles now to Syria, and are also sending several capital ships as a warning to Israel to Syrian waters. What's your view on that?
Yes. The anti-ship missiles have been there for a while also. You know, this is not something new. The Russians seem to think that they are winning the biggest battle in this war, and the biggest battle is to get a peace conference that changes the regime in Syria, but not too much. I think they've given up Assad. I think they've understood, you know, you're not going to keep Assad. But they want a peace conference that is at their behest, that includes Iran, that includes whatever rebel thingies they're forced to accept, but that includes the Syrian government with some representative of Assad. And I think all the rest of this is a way to put themselves in the driver's seat. It will be hard for the United States to say no to that. I'm waiting. I have no idea what the United States is going to do. It seems to me impossible for us to say, yes, the Iranians can come to a peace conference in Moscow, and the U.S. will come to an Iranian-Russian Assad peace conference. But I don't know. Maybe they will. Anybody who's willing to give U.S. missile defense technology to the Russians may decide it's worth going to sit at a peace conference with the Russians. But yeah, the Russians are being quite serious. They do not want this government to fall.
Christine.
The broader and maybe more immediate question of chemical weapons that are in Syria and what to do about those, and are we relying on the Israelis, we being the U.S. at this point, to take care of all of that? Because the word is that they're moving them around and that it's getting harder and harder to find them.
Yes, I think we are relying on the Israelis. I would expect that the Israelis know better than we do where they are, although as they move, you know, people have to watch them. And, you know, there are probably some ringer chemicals. There are these chemical weapons that may have once belonged to Saddam Hussein, which complicates matters because what you thought you knew, you might not actually have known, or that's not clear. Do I think the United States is planning? There are people in the Pentagon who are planning. They plan for everything. There are people who are planning to send U.S. forces into Syria should the need arise. But that's the same as, those are the same people who plan to occupy Beijing should the need arise, or you know, occupy Buenos Aires or something. So I don't think it's serious. I don't think we have a plan to do it, but there are people who are working on what would happen. Yes, I think we have to, at the end of the day, rely on the Israelis, who look at chemicals the way they look at Yakont anti-ship missiles and S-300s as something that you can't allow to move.
Anyone else? Just on that last point, and maybe Steve, you could bring some expertise to bear on this. The way that we have canonically handled chemical weapons is carefully. That doesn't really. Somebody pointed out on the show the other day that in Libya, for example, we had boots on the ground for weeks, if not months, dispensing with what we were told about, at least, of Gaddafi's stocks of chemical weapons. And that was in a relatively benign environment. Can we talk about whether there is an option to destroy these things from the air if you do know where they are and there's evidence that they're about to go someplace else? And do we have the weapons to do that without simply creating a horrific downwind problem, or do you have to put boots on the ground to try to contend with it, whether they're Israeli boots or ours? You want to start?
Go ahead, Steve.
Steve?
Yeah, I testified here in the House about that, and just dropping bombs on them. Now, that's an extreme measure. If the Israelis see them moving something in a convoy, they're going to smoke them, and they're frankly not going to care which way the wind blows, because they don't want it to get in the hands of Hezbollah or somebody like that, or they're going to move it to an actual target. But the option of just, you know, flying over, dropping bombs on all of these sites we think we know that they have chemicals in, that's a crapshoot, because, I mean, you could release the chemicals depending on how they're stored in that particular site. You could just basically blow the gates off of the storage site and then make it accessible to anybody who comes in. It does not, it's nowhere near a guarantee dropping a bomb on a chemical thing that it's going to vaporize all the bad stuff in there. It's probably going to last. It takes a lot of people to go in, grab this stuff, secure it, and then correctly dispose of it. We could take every chemical unit in the United States military, and it would not be enough. My understanding is that some of the training that was going on in Jordan, some of the soft guys we had there, were working with the Jordanians to at least prepare them to have some capability to handle this stuff, so they wouldn't all go in and die from handling this stuff. You know, the Turks have the numbers of people to go in and secure these sites. Maybe the Jordanians now have some people trained. I would think we would almost have to put in some technically trained people, either up-trained soft guys or, you know, our chemical, regular chemical troops to try and deal with this stuff. But, you know, again, Captain Bucci happens to be a chemical officer, and he told me they've talked about this in the U.S. you know, chemical school. That's a mission they do, to go in and kind of scrub these sites. It's really personnel and time intensive. It is not an easy thing. It's not something you do on a wing. You know, I think it might be better if they see something moving in Syria, the Israelis, rather than just smoke it, would be to maybe use their SOF, go in and try and snatch whatever that shipment is that's moving. That's really high risk, really puts the humans at risk, but just dropping bombs on it is not an effective way of destroying chemical weapons. But I don't think they'll take the chance. They'll do something to get rid of it.
Yeah, I would agree with everything, and simply add to that that I think that that's what we're doing in Jordan. I think that's the beginning of our deployment. I'm not sure that they're just training Jordanians. I think we are looking at, if all else fails, do we have to go in on the ground? And so, yeah, I think that's why we're there. And I think we'd rather go in from Jordan. The United States, would rather go in from Jordan than to go in with Israel or from Israel. So I think that's why we're there. It also depends on whether they've mixed some of the chemicals. You know, some of the stuff, if you keep them in separate places, doesn't matter. It's the combinations. So again, if you can't see into the factory, you don't know what they did.
Some of it, if they're already in,
Mike?
sorry, you know, if they're already in shells, particularly artillery shells or warheads, it's a little hard to destroy them. I mean, they're in metal casings, so there's, you know, it's not all just sitting around in plastic buckets, where if you put a hypothermic bomb or something there, it would just burn it all. If it's already in the metal casings, it's a lot more durable than that. And a lot of their stuff is artillery, is you know, rocket warheads as well. So it's not that flimsy.
Which is why Israel has been after launchers, because they don't want them to have launchers. You know, it's a little bit of good news that they're in these metal casings and they're not going to blow up. You know, you can't have some guy stick it on a Jeep and throw it at you. It doesn't work. But that's the Israeli concern about rocket launchers, is exactly that. What do you put on them?
Any other questions? All the way at the end.
Just let me maybe conclude with a rather large, I guess, cynical question. From your presentation, it almost sounds like we're better off if this conflict just continues with no resolution, because either side winning, the way the sides are laid out now, it almost sounds like we're worse off in the Middle East.
Possibly, but what I would say is that nobody's going to win because it's a bigger war than just the war that sits in the middle of Syria. So whether Assad stays or Assad goes, or the Nusra Front comes, or the Nusra Front, or Hezbollah does, you know, whatever, the war is not going to be over anytime soon. You have the real war is between a very large segment of Sunni expansionist Muslims and Shiite expansionist Muslims, and this is their front this morning. And their front can be other places on other days. So I would hesitate to look at Syria as if it is the whole war. It's not. Somebody will win at some point. Somebody will gain control of Syria, or not. Or not. It'll break into little ethnic enclaves. You can't say it's good or bad. It's what it is. And it isn't the end of anything. It is the next front in the Fourth Great War. You had World War I, World War II, Cold War. Now you have this war. This would be the first war in which the United States does not have a natural ally. In World War I and II, we were on the side of the British and the French. Those are our buddies. Those are our cultural heritage people. The Cold War was us. I mean, we had no choice. This war is between two groups of people that are not naturally allied to us, neither one. And it's going to be a long war. Is that a cynical enough answer for a cynical question?
Can I, just a sort of variation on the theme, and then we'll let you go. The point that you've made several times in your remarks is that there's no certainty as to what will happen if we become involved, even just by training and arming some faction. The argument that we're hearing isn't so much that this will really be good in regards to that, as it is that we'll gain influence with whichever faction is coming to the fore. And by the way, I don't think you mentioned this, but the last time I checked, we were actually recognizing the Muslim Brotherhood Prime Minister out of Dallas, Texas, as the go-to guy in all of this. So I'm not quite sure where the Free Syrian Army gets into this mix. But could you just speak to that question of not only is there blowback sometimes when these people wind up killing people we didn't have in mind with weapons, including us, but also this, you know, is there any basis in your study of these matters that it actually translates into influence that is of any value, let alone durable value?
Can you find any?
I'm asking you as the expert.
I can't find any.
I can't find it. I'm not an expert.
Frank, and I am old. I mean, I don't want to say that you're old.
I didn't say you were, and if you want to own up to it, we both are. But
okay.
You don't look like it like I do. But the main thing is, if you haven't seen it,
look,
I don't think it's there.
Looking at where we've tried these things, I think the Libyans... there are Libyans who really would like to be our friends. I do believe that in Libya there are people who would like to be our friends, but we have not provided them with the wherewithal to run their own country. So maybe we have influence with them, but they have no influence with their country. Afghanistan, I don't see it. Iraq, and we pulled out on the Iraqis at a terrible moment. You know, we were willing to spend, from 1945 till the present, in between France and Germany to ensure that they didn't go back to shooting each other. 1953 to the present, between North and South Korea, but we spent, what, 3 years? Between the Sunnis and the Shiites in Iraq, and then we said, now you're on your own, guys, so they're killing each other. So influence is partly a matter of deciding who to support, and then making sure that you support them as long as they need your support. I think the French knew, even when they pulled out of NATO, the French knew that we were going to be there, and the South Koreans know that we're going to be there. There is nobody in the Middle East who knows that we're going to be there. And I think we have no influence with Palestinians. Don't think we have influence in Afghanistan. Don't think we have. Mali, okay, they had the coup. We told them to stop that and go home, and they didn't. It took the French to fight the war for them. So no, I don't see it.